On this day in history, August 10, 1792, in the midst of the French Revolution, the unpopular Louis XVI and his hated Austrian wife Marie Antoinette were overthrown and imprisoned. A year later, the Committee of Public Safety, led by the radical Jacobin Maximilien Robespierre, would decide to execute them by guillotine, a public beheading for all the French people to see. The Committee's reign of terror would continue until Robespierre met death in a similar fashion a year later. The revolutionaries were not done. They confiscated a royal palace, which had served as an art museum where monarchs had been collecting art for centuries, and had actually housed the royal family until Louis XIV opened up Versailles in 1682. On this day, a year after they had overthrown Louis XVI, they opened up this museum, the Louvre, to the French public. It has become the most popular and visited museum in all the world. And while we're on the topic of museums, on this day in 1846, the Americans laid the groundwork for their most famous museum, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian had once been owned by James Smithsonian, an English scientist who had bequeathed it to his nephew and stipulated the United States could have it should his nephew die without an heir. In 1835, his nephew died without an heir, and throughout the decade, the United States government argued about what to do with it. Congressman and former President John Quincy Adams proposed turning it into a museum, which the government eventually agreed on doing.